You're listening to Denver Wine Radio, the podcast about Colorado wine. My name is Paul Bonaquisti. I'm the winemaker at Bonaquisti Wine Company, an urban winery I launched back in 2006 in Denver, Colorado, where I've been making and learning about wine ever since. I'm sitting down with other wineries and wine experts to find out what makes Colorado wine so unique and to help you find the wines you like to drink. And now, let's put some altitude in your glass. The Storm Cellar is a collaborative vision between Steve Steese and Jayme Henderson. They spent many years as sommeliers in the Denver restaurant scene and decided to purchase a vineyard property and move to Colorado's western slope. They'll tell you, the Storm Cellar is a project founded upon a love of Colorado, a desire to make great wine in this great state, and a goal of helping to put a relatively unknown yet up-and-coming region on the national map. And in their short time of launching their winery, they've done just that. Steve and Jayme stopped by the winery after the Governor's Cup tasting back in November, where they won a double gold for their Rosé of St. Vincent. And now, here's Steve and Jayme. Well, how's it going?
It's great.
We're good.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Wow, last night was what a fantastic event.
It was a lot of fun. It was the first time that we'd been around that many people in a long time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, our tasting room situations are pretty intimate. So to have over 500 people in the room was
exhilarating.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
We couldn't wind down till like 1 a.m. So it still feels like morning to us.
We were
today.
keyed up all night. Over caffeinated, that probably was part of the problem.
So, and congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, double gold with your Rosé of St. Vincent.
That's right.
Yes.
So let's start from the beginning. Just tell me your story. I mean, how did it all start?
We can try to keep it succinct for you.
Yeah.
It's multifaceted, but Steve and I were both on the front range as wine buyers, as sommeliers, beverage directors for about over 15 years. And in 2016, we were out at a winery, Peter Michael Winery, with Sir Peter Michael. We were at a table on a wine buying trip for the restaurant. And he asked us, tell me about Colorado wine. And neither of us had an adequate answer. We could name maybe 3 wineries. And so we decided to set out on a quest. And that was, May 2016. The next week, Steve was working at the restaurant and I did an internet search and looked at Colorado vineyards for sale. We were not even in the market. It was kind of a crazy thing to Google. But we ended up making a road trip out to the western slope to the West Elks. And long story short, we wrote a business plan from seeing this particular vineyard site. Weren't able to put an offer on the property for like 6 months. And we're just nail biting that someone else wouldn't put an offer. And so 2017, moved out, hit the ground running in March and pruned vines, sold grapes our first year and made wine in 2018 was our first vintage. So
wow.
Big 180. So
how many acres of grapes were there so you bought an existing vineyard and how big was it?
Sure. Existing vineyard. The vineyards, the whole property is almost 90 acres. The vineyard space within that property, there's a fence line that encloses the space that's about 23 acres, of which we've got maybe 10 up and running currently. The goal is to get all 23 acres up and running within the next 5 years. Goal, I'd say 5 years. If we can get 23 acres running and we're pulling in 2 tons an acre and we're bringing in 50 tons of fruit off our own vineyard, that's pretty close to the model for our project that we're trying to hit.
I want to captivate that.
Oh, good. And you only do white and rosé.
That's it.
That's right.
That's it.
We don't ever say never. We're open.
And then I'll just say this: when I first heard of your winery, and I thought you're only doing whites and rosés. What are they, crazy? That's right. That's the thinking, and that's obviously wrong.
When we first bought that property, there's 7 acres of Riesling there, and half a dozen Colorado winemakers were like, "That's a lot of Riesling. You're never going to be able to sell all that Riesling." And
they're like,
Jayme
"What are you
and I
going to do with it?"
"Oh, game on!"
See,
yeah,
that is the best when somebody tells you can't do it,
yes.
and you got to go. You got to show them.
It kind of fires you up.
Yeah.
You're just like, watch, we'll make it work. Challenge accepted.
Definitely. So what has been the challenges?
Oh my.
Multitudes of challenge. It's an own-rooted vineyard, just like the rest of Colorado. We discovered phylloxera in the vineyard shortly after purchasing it that first spring, and it has ravaged the vineyard. It was so much faster than you think. And then it's been multiplied by 2 really crippling Octobers in a row. So vineyard rehab has been a big project for sure. Obviously, with phylloxera, we've been replanting with grafted vines pretty much nonstop ever since then. But, people ask, what's the hardest part? Is it farming? Is it winemaking? We joke that being a new small business owner is every bit as difficult as that. The paperwork, the permits, the documents, all that. The government, I mean, as soon as you tell the government you're working with alcohol, they are into what you're doing. They want into your business. And man, you just got to keep up with all that stuff. And it's so hard when you're trying to run a farm, trying to run a tasting room and manage all that stuff. It's a lot.
We live right there where it's all happening. People have to drive past, our house. And so there's no separation of home life and business life. That has been the biggest challenge for me personally, is just finding a respite,
Yeah. And government being all up in your business. A couple of months ago, I had a state inspection here. So he gave me a list of things I need to do on top of everything else, right? So that's just how it goes. But so did you just teach yourself viticulture? I mean, to grow grapes? Or did you just get out there and,
there was a lot of crowdsourcing. So we had done, internships at various wineries, helped with harvest. And of course, that doesn't give you the full spectrum by any means. And the crazy part that I like to say is, Steve and I, we gardened in Denver. We gardened a city block, tore it up. We had 42 tomato plants, proud of that, a bunch of peppers. And we're like, you know what? We can scale this up a little. And so that is the insane part. We're just like, if we're meticulous, if we can work with the season, we can learn this. And I think if we had overthought it, looking back, I'm just like, maybe it was a wild, really overwhelming decision to make. But the winemaking too, we had done some internship making wine, and you just see the process, these little segments. And so there was a lot of learning on the fly. There are a lot of stories where it was just like, okay, turning the valves on and opening them when you have your press and there's 3-4 tons of fruit inside. You need to have those valves open. And midway through a press cycle, when you see a little stream of juice coming out the top porthole and you realize that the pressure is building, that happened. That was our first press. And a lot of stories like that. We never made that mistake again. We always look to make sure those valves are open. So
a sharp learning curve.
Yeah.
People think it's an easy transition. Oh, you're a sommelier and now you're a winemaker. That makes sense.
No.
But in a lot of ways, it totally doesn't make sense at all. Somms is all technical knowledge. We had a lot of book knowledge and facts and information, but putting that technical knowledge into practical use, you buy a vineyard that's 30 years old and the irrigation system was put in 30 years ago. It's all underground. Like, where does it actually go? What's happened? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
What is going on here? I've got a 30-year-old Italian press and a brand new Japanese pump, and I live in the middle of nowhere. How do we physically hook these things together? People don't realize that when you're in a place like California, that it's not just that grapes want to grow there. There's 100 different support industries for the wine industry that we have no access to. There's no parts. There's no service. There's no tech support for any of those things. Every product we need, we have to ship in from the western coast, not slope.
To an isolated town.
Yeah, it's a small town. It's barely 1,000 people. It's a very rural town, but we were so intrigued by the idea of farming and growing grapes at this property. It's 6,000 feet. It is the fringe of where grape growing is humanly possible. And does Unique make a better wine? Maybe not, but Unique does tell a story, and story is such a part of the wine experience. So,
yeah, definitely. And your story is success, I think, from start to, in your short amount of time. Of course, you were in the Governor's Cup case this year. We didn't have one last year, but 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think prior to that, didn't you have wine?
That was our first
That
release.
was your first release.
Mm-hmm.
You had a wine in the Governor's Cup.
Which was
2.
crazy. Yeah, 2.
2. Yeah.
And those were our Rieslings. It definitely helped with our motivation. Hey, we're doing something right. There's always room for improvement. But that was pretty wild. Yeah.
And your somm skills, come on, when it comes down to putting the blend together and the finished product, it's absolutely necessary. It helps. It's necessary. A lot of practice
and tasting. Yeah. And it's just it's like building a well-balanced cocktail. It's a lot. That's one of our favorite parts is the blending session, in the winter, which is coming up. We're in blending season coming up.
That's exciting.
So people ask all the time, how'd you do this? How'd you come out of the gate so hard? And even us, we ask each other that sometimes, like, what is it we're doing? You know, what is the secret ingredient? And I think you hit it. It's just that, you know, years as somms, we tasted the greatest wines from all over the world at the restaurants we were at for years and years. And so we went into this with a pretty clear picture of what it was we were trying to create. You know, when you start a business, you have to kind of make a decision. Am I going to try and find a guest and see what kind of wine they like and make a wine for that guest? Or are we going to try and make the wines that we want to make and then go find the guest that likes those wines? And either one of those is a viable option, you know, but we were like, why don't we just make the wines we want to drink? Somebody else has got to want to drink those kinds of wines too. So in general, our style's really clean, lighter, not as heavy as extracted and exhausting as a lot of other wines seem to be. We love to taste wines. We wrote the wine list at one of the greatest steakhouses in the United States. We tasted the greatest Cabernets in the world night after night. We still love to taste those wines, but that's not necessarily what I like to drink. And I like to drink wine. I want something that's invigorating and not going to put me to sleep, lively, not so extracted and gigantic. And so.
That's awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. But thanks for popping in the studio today.
Oh, thanks, Paul.
We're excited to take some of your wine home and replenish our collection and get after some good reds.
Thank you.
It'll be perfect for these upcoming months. I can't wait.
That's our show for this week. Thank you so much for listening to Denver Wine Radio. Your homework for the week is to go out and taste some Colorado wine. If you have any questions or comments, or just want to let us know what you're drinking, go to denverwineradio.com, where you can email us or leave us a voice message. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, put some altitude in your glass.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.
I'm Jeff Woods, and I'm shining a light on music and the rock stars who make it.
He just was one of those people, he stood out.
He was a magic guy. He really was a magic guy. We all have faults. He had the same amount of faults as we all have.
This was before Led Zeppelin. Robert was full on. I mean, he was Led Zeppelin without the band behind him. He had the hair, the jeans, the whole thing, you know, and he was amazing.
The Records and Rockstars podcast, heard around the world and yours to hear wherever you get podcasts. All the episodes from JeffWoodsRadio.com.